Hi everyone. This week's assignment is another bouncing ball. It's going to be very similar to the rubber ball that we did, but in this case we're going to focus on overlap and follow through. You have probably already noticed the ball has a tail on it. That's what we're going to use to work in our overlap and follow through. We're going to essentially bounce this ball the way that we did before. We're going to build it up in layers. We're going to do the bounce first. We're not going to do any squash and stretch on this one because that's not really the purpose of this exercise. If you want to add it, you certainly can. The rig isn't really set up for it, but if you want to try adding it, you're certainly welcome to. We're going to build it in layers like we did before. We're going to do the bounce first, then we're going to kind of rotate it so that the tail roughly follows the path of the ball. And then we're going to get in and we're going to actually animate the portions of the tail so that it truly follows and the action of the tail overlaps the action of the ball. So this rig is up on canvas. It's up there waiting for you. And we're going to do just like we did before. I'm going to animate this from the side. And the main control is right here. Let me show you that in the perspective view so you can see a little easier. So here's the main control. This moves the ball up and down as well as rotating it. And then the rest of these controls right here animate, only rotate and animate the portions of the tail. We'll get to those in just a little bit. So I move my horizon down, my center line down to the bottom of the view so I can use that as a ground plane. And I'm going to grab my main control here, get my move tool. I'm only doing one bounce. I think the assignment is that you have to do 2 bounces on screen. But I'm just going to do one because it'll show you what we're up to. Put the ball up here. I'm going to set a key. I've got my auto keying on, so I may or may not hand set keys, just so you know. And I'm going to come out to frame 13, about halfway through the bounce. And I'm going to go down here. What I'm concerned with right now is just getting the position of the ball, the bounce positions of the ball. And of course, I could hit playback, but it's not ready. We're going to have to go in here to our graph editor. And just like we've done with all of our other bounces, we have to come in here and grab our center key. We're going to break the tangents. We're going to take the handles and get that nice sharp change of direction that we like so much. That looks pretty good. Rewind and play, and there's our bounce. So that's the first step. Now what we want to do, because we got the tail off of the ball, we want to rotate the ball so that it looks as though it's leading the tail through the bounce. The easiest way to do that is in our animation menu set to go to visualize and create editable motion trail. And that's going to give us our motion trail just like we had before. This seems a little steep, so I'm going to go back into the graph editor and play with that just a little bit more. Give us a little bit more of a drop. That's a little better. So on frame 1, we're okay because we're coming into the bounce. On frame 13, where we set our down key, we want to take the ball and we want to rotate it up so that it's coming down like this. Now I'm going to have to move that up just a little bit because we're going through the ground plane. So we'll put that there. That looks pretty good. I'm looking at the ball and in this very first joint where the tail attaches to the ball. I'm aligning those with the editable motion trail. That's really what I'm concerned with at this point. And then over here in frame 24, I'm going to make sure that this is rotated back around so that it's following the path so that that editable motion trail is going through the ball in that first connection. A little tweak there. We're going to come back to frame 13. After we hit the ground, that's pretty close. Fix it just a little bit. There we go. After it hits the ground, the very next frame, it does this. Now we don't want that. Again, we want the ball to look like it's leading the tail through. So on frame 14, we're going to come through here. We're going to take and bend or rotate our ball so that the tail is following. We'll get, right now the tail's going through the floor. We'll fix that in just a minute. But, so we've got the ball striking the ground and then bouncing up, and the tail is trailing that action. Now we're probably also going to need to come about halfway between the main keys, say about frame 8, and make sure that everything is as we want it. We could afford to rotate this just a little bit to line that up a little better. That lines up there. And then we're going to come over here about halfway between frame 13 and 27 and make sure that everything's aligned along that path again. Just like that. And now we should have a ball that travels pretty much along the path of action. It's there, bounces up, and you can see that the whole time that it's moving, the ball and that first connection are following that path of action. There we go. So those are the first couple of steps in doing this. Now the next thing we're going to do is we're going to get the tail following the path as well. There's a couple of tricky areas here that you want to be aware of. We'll get to those in just a second. But the first thing we're going to do, we're going to set keys for all of our controls. On frame 1, we want to get all of our controls and set a key for them. And that's so that when we set keys further along the timeline, Maya will make those transitions for us. I'm going to select all of those, hit S, and that sets a key there. And then I'm going to come out to about frame 8 where I checked and aligned things before. Remember, the ball has a rotation key on frame 8. So it's good to keep all this stuff together. So now what I want to do is take these controls and align the tail so that the length of the tail follows the path of action. So I'm going to just work my way down the controls here. My auto key is on, so it'll set the rotation keys for me. And I'm just going to rotate these so we get a nice curved tail shape following that path of action. In some cases, I probably don't need to actually rotate it a little bit, but I mess with the rotation a little just so that Maya will set the key for me. I didn't really do a whole lot to those controls at the very end because the tail was already following the path. But I want keys on those, and I want them to be rotation keys only. I don't want positional keys. Well, we can't do positional keys on these controls, but it's a good idea to set keys on everything anytime you change a pose. We're following this down. So far it's looking pretty good. Right about there, the tail starts to move away significantly from the path. So I'm going to go through again and give these a little tweak. The higher up on the tail you go, the larger the transition is. So if you really just need to tweak the position a little bit, you can grab these controls up near this end, near where the tail attaches to the ball. But again, I'm still going to go through and make sure that I adjust these a little bit so that Maya will go ahead and set a key for me. Always a good idea to have keys on every frame where there's some action happening. There's frame 13. Even though we set it on 12, frame 13 is still significantly off of the path. You see the tip of the tail is way away from the path. So we'll come through here and we'll adjust this and adjust this. Working our way down the length of the tail, making sure that the tail follows through the path of action. Editable motion trail is the path of action, just so you know. Now down here at the bottom is where some of the tricky business comes in. We're coming in, the ball hits, and then it does this turn. Now we want the tail to still follow the path of action, but since the ball hit the ground, the tail also has to touch the ground. So these guys I'm not going to really do a whole lot with. They're doing okay. They're following along the path pretty well. But as you get down to these third and fourth controls, these are where we're going to have to really tweak. We're really going to have to bend these around because we want the tail to follow that path of action, the path of action of the ball, that is. And what that means is we have to have a bend in our tail. So we're going to take this like this. It does push it off of the path a little bit, but what you can do to compensate for that is just bring it around a little bit. So that it's got this nice bend to it. So here comes the ball. Now see, one of these I didn't set a key on the previous frame, so it got tweaked. So we'll just go back and fix that. Readjust this so that the tail still follows the path. And it comes, boom, there's our tail touching the ground, more or less. Let me tweak that a little bit, bring that down. Why wasn't it touching any longer? Because, like I said, some of the controls didn't get set on the previous key, so when or on the previous frame, excuse me. So when I adjusted them, Maya's in-betweening changed as well. So now, here's frame 15, and we're going to have to adjust it a little bit more. Again, we want the tail to follow the path. We don't want a single frame of the tail bending into an S shape, so we're going to kind of cheat just a little bit on this guy. We're going to bring this down, straighten it out mostly straight. But I want to leave a little bit of a bend in the tail, just a tiny bit, just to kind of carry it along. If you have an action that has one frame that's significantly different than every other frame around it, it has a little snap to it. It ends up looking a little strange. So you typically want to avoid that. And the way you do that is by having a transition out into the next pose, if you know what I mean. So on frame 13, we were straight. On frame 14, we've got this really significant bend. And then on frame 15, we want to keep just a little bit of a bend in it to help the eye transition back into the straight tail that we'll have here in just a minute. And I'm just kind of futzing around with this a little bit, just getting it the way I want it. It takes a little trial and error sometimes, but for me, that's the fun part of what we're doing, is we get to mess around a little bit and kind of play with it. And then we're going to go to frame 16 and make sure that I straighten all of these out so that everything follows the path of action again. We're well clear of the ground at this point, so we don't really have to worry too much about the bend. The bend is not going to be part of our equation anymore. Whoops. Get that control. Oh, that landed right on the line. There we go. Landed right on the line. It was tricky to grab that little guy. You can hear that alarm in the background. I apologize for that. It's just an alarm I set for something else that I forgot to turn off before I started recording. So apologies if that's distracting. So here we go. You can also kind of tell which ones need to be adjusted just by looking at the angle that the control is at. If you got a control or two that are at a very widely different angle than some of the other controls on the rig, then that'll give you a hint as to which ones you really need to work with. There we go. That's pretty good. So coming in, frame 13, frame 14 is our bend. Frame 15 has just a little bit of that curve on it to help our eye transition. Frame 16, we're straight again. And then we'll come out to about frame 20 and check things. We can use these controls to get back onto the path. Just keeping an eye on things, making sure that things line up correctly. Keep the tip of that tail on the path of action as much as you possibly can. And then finally, frame 24, we'll come in here and we'll, actually I don't use that one. I'm just going to stick with this. Actually, I only need to do that one, don't I? And everything lined up really nicely. Okay. So, frame 1, roughly, frame 8, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, and then out. You can also scrub this and kind of see if there's any areas that need attention. After frame 8, I guess frame 10, we could adjust this a little bit. We're always using that editable motion trail as our path of action to make sure that things are lining up the way they should. And then right to there. Very good. I want to rewind. I'm going to click off the controls here so that those are hidden. I'm going to highlight my path of action and delete it. And then play. And it's playing very slowly. I'm not entirely sure why. It's at real time. Okay. Well, it helps us to see the action anyway. We'll go ahead and play blast this. Right click, play blast. Because then we'll get a real time play of what's going on. Loop this, play it. There it goes. Looks like my computer might be a little slow. Of course, it is, over 100 degrees right now as I'm recording this, so maybe the computer's just going, oh, man, it's really hot. So there's our tail ball, and as we step through this, as we slide through, you can see that the tail is following the path of action. We've got got the bend at the bottom where the tail touches the ground plane. We've got this transitional frame where this curve really probably technically wouldn't be there, but it's there to kind of help our eye along. And then we're back on the path until we get back up to this top piece. Okay. So take a look at the assignment. We will have talked about it in class, but if memory serves, it's 2 bounces coming in from off screen and leaving. That's usually how we do it. But the instructions on the assignment are the instructions to follow. If I've just said something that's different than what the Canvas assignment says, please do what the Canvas assignment says. And if you have any questions, don't hesitate to email me. Don't hesitate to call the office, or just drop by and say hi, and we'll go over it. All right? We'll see you next week.